the ice cracking beneath my boots that February morning in Lakeview Heights, Minnesota, sounded like gunshots echoing across the frozen pond, and I knew right then that this winter was going to end badly for someone. I had moved into this quiet subdivision outside Duluth about 3 years ago, purchasing a modest lakefront property that backed right up to the community pond. The place was perfect for me. A divorced 42-year-old mechanical engineer who just wanted some peace after years of city living and a messy separation. My name is Robert Irving, and I thought buying into a homeowner association would mean organized community events and well-maintained common areas. I was wrong about that second part. The pond itself was about 2 acres, shared by roughly 15 properties that bordered it. The HOA owned and maintained a community dock that jutted out about 30 feet into the water, supported by 8 wooden pylons that had been there since the development was built in 2003. During summer months, residents could use the dock for fishing, swimming, or just sitting and watching the sunset. During winter, the pond froze solid, creating a thick sheet of ice that typically lasted from December through March. That morning, I was out on the ice doing what I had done every winter since moving in, clearing a walking path. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I enjoyed the exercise and the fresh air. The temperature was hovering around 15 degrees and my breath formed white clouds as I worked. I had just finished clearing a section near my property line when I heard her voice. "Excuse me, sir." I turned to see Patricia Donovan marching across the ice toward me like she owned the place. Well, technically, as the HOA president, she thought she did own every square inch of common property. Patricia was 53, with that signature Karen haircut where the back is shorter than the front, dyed an aggressive shade of blonde that nature never intended. She wore a puffy white jacket that made her look like the Michelin Man and carried a clipboard, which she always had with her like it was surgically attached to her hand. "Morning, Patricia," I called out, leaning on my ice shovel. "Robert, I need to discuss something with you immediately." She stopped about 5 feet away, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Patricia was not built for trudging across ice. "What is on your mind?" "The ice. This ice." She gestured dramatically at the frozen pond beneath our feet. "The board held an emergency meeting last night, and we have decided that the ice accumulation this year poses a significant risk to the community dock structure." I stared at her. "Patricia, ice forms every winter. The dock has been fine for 22 years. That is not the point." Her voice went up an octave. "This winter has been particularly cold, and the ice is thicker than usual. Our maintenance consultant says that ice expansion could damage the pylons. We need someone to manage the ice levels around the dock area." "Manage the ice levels," I repeated slowly. "It is a frozen pond. Nature does not exactly follow HOA regulations." Her lips pursed into that tight line I had come to recognize as her signature expression of displeasure. "Do not be difficult, Robert. You are out here almost every day with your equipment. The board has voted to assign you the responsibility of keeping the ice cleared around the dock pylons. Specifically, you need to create and maintain a 3-foot buffer zone around each pylon to prevent ice pressure damage." "Patricia, I clear ice for exercise and to make a walking path." "What you are describing is actual labor. That is what we pay HOA dues for. Hire a professional." She flipped through papers on her clipboard. "According to Article 17, Section 4 of our covenants, all residents are required to assist in maintaining common areas when called upon by the board. This is your official notice. You have until this weekend to establish the buffer zones, and you will need to maintain them throughout the remainder of winter. And if I refuse, Then, you will be in violation of community covenants, and the board will have no choice but to levy fines. $50 per day until compliance is achieved. She smiled that tight, triumphant smile. I am sure you will make the right choice. Before I could respond, she turned and carefully made her way back across the ice toward shore. I watched her go, feeling anger build in my chest. This was classic Patricia. The woman had made it her life's mission to control every aspect of Lakeview Heights since being elected president 2 years ago. She had fined the Petersons $300 for having their garbage cans visible from the street. She had forced the Carters to repaint their house because their chosen shade of gray was not on the approved color list. And now she was trying to force me into unpaid manual labor. I looked at the dock, its wooden platform covered in snow, the pylons disappearing into the ice. The whole structure looked solid and stable, just like it did every winter. I had never heard of ice-damaging dock pylons. Sure, ice expansion was a real phenomenon, but properly installed pylons accounted for that. They had flexibility built in. Over the next 2 days, I did some research. I called a dock installation company in Duluth and spoke with their engineer. He confirmed what I suspected. Ice formation around stationary pylons was normal and generally not harmful, especially for established structures. The pylons had been through 21 previous freeze-thaw cycles without issue. However, he also mentioned something interesting. The only time we see ice causing real problems, he had said, is when someone tries to actively manage it. You start breaking ice away from the pylons, you create stress points. Ice refreezes in weird patterns, expands in unpredictable ways. Best thing you can do with a dock in winter is leave it alone. Nature knows what it is doing. Armed with this information, I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for that Thursday evening. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that mainly served as a glorified storage facility with a meeting room attached. When I arrived at 7 in the evening, about a dozen residents were already seated in folding chairs facing a table where Patricia sat flanked by 2 other board members. Gregory Walsh, the vice president and Patricia's loyal lapdog, and Susan Mitchell, the treasurer who rarely spoke during meetings. Gregory was a thin man in his 60s who had retired from some middle management position and now spent his days finding things to complain about. Susan was younger, maybe early 40s, and I got the impression she mainly wanted to keep the peace. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel against the table. She went through the usual agenda items: architectural review approvals, financial reports, upcoming neighborhood events. Then she got to what she clearly considered the main event. Before we open the floor to resident comments, I want to address an important maintenance issue, Patricia announced, looking directly at me. As many of you know, we have had concerns about ice damage to our community dock. The board passed a resolution requiring Robert Irving to maintain ice clearance around the dock pylons. Unfortunately, Mr. Irving has not yet complied with this directive. I raised my hand. I would like to speak to that. Patricia's expression soured. You will have your chance during resident comments. Actually, Patricia, since you just publicly called me out by name, I think I should be able to respond immediately. Several residents murmured in agreement. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue but seemed to realize it would look bad. Fine. Keep it brief. I stood up. I contacted a professional dock installation company this week. They said that ice formation around dock pylons is normal and that actively clearing ice can actually create more problems than it solves. They recommended leaving the dock alone. I pulled out my phone. I have the conversation recorded if anyone wants to hear it. That is hearsay, Gregory interjected. We have our own maintenance consultant who says otherwise. Then let me meet with your consultant. Let me see their credentials and their reasoning. Patricia shuffled papers on her clipboard. That is not necessary. The board has made its decision based on expert advice. Your compliance is mandatory. Based on what expert advice? Who is this consultant? What are their qualifications? That is confidential board business, Patricia snapped. How can maintenance advice be confidential? We are talking about a shared community structure. Every resident here has a right to know the basis for major maintenance decisions. A woman in the back, Linda Peterson, spoke up. She has a point, Patricia. We all pay for dock maintenance. Who is this consultant? Patricia's face flushed red. The consultant's identity is not relevant. What is relevant is that Robert needs to comply with the board's directive or face fines starting Monday. This is ridiculous, I said. You cannot fine me for refusing to do unpaid manual labor based on advice from some mystery consultant who probably does not exist. How dare you? Patricia stood up so fast her chair scraped backward. I have devoted countless hours to this community, and I will not be accused of dishonesty. Then prove me wrong. Show us the consultant's report. The room fell silent. Patricia and I locked eyes. Finally, she said, "This meeting is adjourned. Robert, you have until Monday. That is final." She grabbed her clipboard and stormed out of the room with Gregory scrambling to follow her. Susan remained at the table, looking uncomfortable. Several residents came up to me afterward, some offering support, others suggesting I just do what Patricia wanted to avoid trouble. I left feeling frustrated but determined not to cave. That weekend, I did not touch the ice around the dock. I also did not do my usual ice clearing for my walking path. If Patricia wanted to play hardball, I could play too. Monday morning arrived, and sure enough, by Monday afternoon, I had a formal violation notice in my mailbox. $50 per day, starting immediately, for failure to maintain the dock ice buffer zones. I called a lawyer the next day. His name was James Thornton, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Duluth, in one of those old brick buildings that had been renovated into something modern inside while keeping the historic exterior. James was in his mid-50s, with gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he had seen his share of ridiculous HOA cases. After I explained the situation, James leaned back in his leather chair and shook his head. "HOA," he said with a sigh. "Some of them are well-run and reasonable. Others become little fiefdoms. Sounds like you have got the latter. Can they actually fine me for this? That depends. They can fine you for covenant violations, but the enforcement has to be reasonable and consistently applied. The question is whether their directive falls within their authority. Let me look at your covenants and the board's resolution." I had brought copies of everything: the community covenants, the violation notice, my recorded conversation with the dock company. James spent about 20 minutes reviewing the documents. "Okay, here is the situation," he finally said. Article 17, Section 4 does technically give the board authority to request resident assistance with common area maintenance. However, case law in Minnesota generally holds that such requests must be reasonable in scope, duration, and frequency. Asking you to perform ongoing skilled labor without compensation probably exceeds what courts consider reasonable. So I can fight this. You can, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming. My honest advice: comply with their directive for a few weeks while I draft a formal objection to the board. Document everything you do, keep time logs, track expenses. Then we request reimbursement for your labor and materials. If they refuse, we have a stronger case for demonstrating unreasonable demands. I did not like that answer, but I understood the logic. What if I just stopped clearing ice altogether? I was doing it voluntarily anyway. If they want to force me to do it their way, maybe I just do not do it at all. James considered this. That is certainly your right. You are not obligated to maintain common areas beyond what is explicitly required in the covenants. If you stop, what happens? I guess the ice just does what ice does naturally. And if that causes problems, the dock company said leaving it alone is actually better than active management. Then you have expert opinion supporting your decision. The question is, would stopping be seen as retaliatory or simply you discontinuing voluntary activity? I have been clearing ice for 3 years without being asked. I am not violating anything by stopping. James nodded slowly. True. You know what? That might actually be your best play here. Stop all ice clearing. Document that you are doing nothing to either help or harm the dock. Let nature take its course. If the dock is fine, which it should be based on your expert consultation, then Patricia's whole premise collapses. If something does happen, you have documentation showing you were advised that non-interference was the proper approach. We talked for a few more minutes, and I left his office feeling somewhat better. I paid his $300 consultation fee and drove home with a new plan. I would not clear ice around the dock pylons. But more importantly, I would not clear ice at all. I would let the pond freeze and thaw according to its natural cycle, just like it had for millions of years before humans decided to build docks. The first few days were harder than I expected. I was used to my morning routine, bundling up, grabbing my ice shovel and snow blower, and spending an hour or so clearing my walking path across the pond. It was meditative in a way. But now I just watched from my window as snow accumulated and ice thickened. The dock sat there in the middle of the frozen expanse, slowly disappearing under winter's white blanket. Patricia, of course, noticed immediately. On Wednesday morning, she was at my door at 8 in the morning, banging hard enough to rattle the frame. I opened the door in my bathrobe and slippers. Morning, Patricia. Robert, you are still not maintaining the buffer zones. The fines have now reached $250 and they will keep growing until you comply. I am not going to comply, I said calmly. I have consulted with an attorney and with dock maintenance professionals. I am not required to perform manual labor for the HOA, and interfering with natural ice formation could actually damage the dock. That is nonsense. Our consultant clearly stated that ice pressure needs to be managed. Then have your consultant do it, or hire someone. That is what our dues pay for. Her face turned a shade of purple that could not be healthy. You are deliberately sabotaging community property. I am doing nothing. That is the opposite of sabotage. You were maintaining the ice before. Your sudden refusal is clearly retaliatory. I was clearing ice for my own exercise and enjoyment. I have decided to stop. I am allowed to change my voluntary activities. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You will regret this, Robert Irving. The board has options. We can place a lien on your property. We can take you to court. We can make your life very difficult. And I can countersue for harassment, I replied. Patricia, you are on my doorstep before 8 in the morning screaming at me. I suggest you leave before I call the police. For a moment, I thought she might actually try to hit me. Her whole body was tense, vibrating with rage. But finally, she spun around and stalked back to her car, parked awkwardly half on my driveway. She peeled out with enough force to spray gravel against my garage door. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I was not naturally confrontational, but something about Patricia's entitled attitude pushed every button I had. I thought about my ex-wife, who had also tried to control every aspect of our lives together. This felt like that same battle all over again, except now I was standing my ground. Over the next few weeks, winter did what winter does in Minnesota. The temperatures fluctuated between 0 and 30 degrees. Snow fell, covering the pond in pristine white. The ice thickened, contracted, expanded, and made those eerie groaning sounds that frozen lakes make at night. Through it all, I did nothing. I watched from my window, occasionally taking photos to document the dock's condition. The pylons stood firm, the platform remained level, everything looked fine. Patricia, meanwhile, escalated. The daily fines continued to accumulate, reaching into the thousands of dollars. I received certified letters demanding payment. Then, in early March, I received a notice that the HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines and assessments. I called James immediately. "They are putting a lien on my house." "Expected," he said. "Do not panic. A lien does not mean they can force a sale. It just means the debt is attached to the property. We will deal with it. More importantly, how is the dock?" "Fine, completely fine. No visible damage, no structural issues. It is just sitting there like it has for 22 winters." "Good, keep documenting." We are building a case that their maintenance concerns were baseless and their demands were unreasonable. I am almost done drafting our formal response. We will be filing a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Commerce, which oversees HOA disputes, and potentially filing a civil suit for harassment and wrongful fines. "How much is this going to cost me?" James was quiet for a moment. "I will be honest, Robert. Litigation is expensive. We are probably looking at $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees if this goes all the way. But I think we have a strong case, and you may be able to recover those costs if we prevail." I felt sick. This was getting way out of hand over a pond that did not need managing in the first place. But I had come too far to back down now. March arrived with the first hints of spring. Temperatures started staying above freezing during the day, though nights were still cold. The ice on the pond began to change, turning gray and developing that rotten look that means breakup is coming. This was always the most interesting time of year on the pond, watching the transition from solid ice to open water. I was sitting on my back deck one afternoon in mid-March, enjoying the rare sunshine and temperatures in the low 40s, when I noticed something odd. The ice around the dock pylons looked strange. Not damaged exactly, but different. I grabbed my binoculars and looked more closely. The ice had formed in thick ridges around each pylon, creating pressure points exactly like the dock company had warned about. But this was not from natural freezing. Someone had been clearing ice and it had refrozen in uneven patterns. I walked down to the shore and carefully made my way out onto the ice, which was still thick enough to support my weight, though I was cautious. As I got closer to the dock, I could see fresh shovel marks in the snow and places where ice had clearly been chipped away and then refrozen. Someone had been out here working, and recently. The ice they had cleared had melted slightly during the day and then refrozen at night, creating dense, irregular chunks that were pushing against the pylons. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos, documenting everything. Then I noticed something else. One of the pylons, the one on the northwest corner, was leaning slightly. Not much, maybe a few degrees, but it was definitely not vertical anymore. I crouched down and looked at where the pylon met the ice. The wooden post had fresh scrape marks on it, and the ice around its base was fractured in a spider web pattern. Someone had damaged the dock, and it was not from leaving the ice alone. It was from actively trying to clear it. I carefully made my way back to shore and immediately called James. "We have a problem. Someone has been clearing ice around the dock pylons and one of the pylons is damaged." "Are you sure?" "Positive. Fresh shovel marks, recent work, and one of the support posts is leaning. The ice damage is exactly what the dock company warned about." "Do you have photos?" "Dozens." "Good. Do not touch anything else. Do not go back out there. I am going to contact an independent inspector to document the damage." "This might actually work in your favor, Robert. If the HOA caused damage through improper maintenance, they cannot blame you for it." "You think Patricia did this? Or someone acting on her behalf? Either way, we need professional documentation before spring thaw destroys the evidence." James worked fast. By the next morning, he had arranged for a dock inspection company out of Duluth to come assess the situation. The inspector was a weathered man in his 50s named Carl Morton, who had been installing and repairing docks for 30 years. He spent 2 hours examining the pylons, taking measurements, photographs, and samples of the ice. I stood on shore with James, watching Carl work. A few neighbors had gathered too, curious about the activity. I noticed Patricia's car drive past slowly, but she did not stop. When Carl finished, he came over to us carrying a clipboard. "Well, you have got damage, no question. That northwest pylon has shifted about 4 degrees off vertical. The concrete footer is probably cracked too, though I cannot confirm that until the ice melts. You have also got stress fractures in 3 of the other pylons." "What caused it?" James asked. Carl pointed toward the dock. "See those ice patterns? That is from repeated clearing and refreezing. Someone has been chopping ice away during the day, then it melts a bit in the sun, and when it refreezes at night, it expands with force. Do that over and over, and you create pressure points that push against the wood. Natural ice formation spreads the pressure evenly, but this concentrated pressure is what causes damage. Professional opinion, what should have been done this winter? Nothing. Leave it alone. That dock has been there for over 20 years. It knows how to handle winter. This damage is 100% from human interference." Carl flipped through his notes. "I would estimate 10 to 15,000 in repairs. You will need to pull the damaged pylons, assess the footer situation, possibly pour new footers, install new posts, and reinforce the platform. It is not catastrophic, but it is not cheap either." James was already typing on his phone. "Can you have a formal written report ready by tomorrow? I can have it to you by this evening." After Carl left, James turned to me with something that almost looked like a smile. "Robert, I think Patricia just handed us our case on a silver platter." "What do you mean?" She demanded you clear ice, claiming it was necessary to protect the dock. "You refused based on professional advice that clearing ice would cause damage. Someone, presumably acting on the HOA's behalf, then cleared the ice themselves. And that clearing caused the exact damage that professionals warned about. This demonstrates that your refusal was reasonable, and that the HOA's demands were not only unreasonable but actively harmful." "So what happens now?" "Now we go on offense. I am going to demand an emergency HOA board meeting. We are going to present Carl's report and demand that all fines against you be dropped immediately. We are also going to demand that the HOA explain who authorized the ice clearing that caused the damage." The emergency meeting was scheduled for 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon. James sent formal notice to all board members and posted it on the community website, making it a properly noticed open meeting that any resident could attend. By the time Saturday arrived, it seemed like half the neighborhood wanted to be there. The community clubhouse was packed. All the folding chairs were taken, and people lined the walls. Patricia sat at the board table looking like she had not slept in days. Gregory was beside her, and Susan looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. James and I sat in the front row with Carl Morton beside us. Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice tight. "This is an emergency meeting called at the request of Robert Irving's attorney. Mr. Thornton, you have the floor." James stood and distributed packets to the board members and several residents. "Thank you. We are here today because of a serious situation regarding the community dock and Robert Irving's assessment of fines. As you will see in the distributed materials, an independent dock inspector examined the community dock on March 18th and found significant damage to multiple pylons." Patricia interrupted. "Yes, damage caused by Mr. Irving's refusal to maintain the ice as directed. Actually, Madam President, the damage was caused by exactly the opposite. Mr. Morton, would you please explain your findings?" Carl stood up and walked through his report in plain language. He showed photos of the ice patterns, explained the mechanics of how the damage occurred, and made it absolutely clear that the damage resulted from human ice clearing, not from leaving the ice alone. When Carl finished, the room was silent. Patricia's face had gone from red to white. "Finally," she said, "even if that is true, it does not change the fact that Robert was required to maintain the ice and refused." "Actually," James said, "it changes everything. Before you issued your directive, Robert consulted with dock maintenance professionals who specifically advised him that clearing ice would cause damage. He refused your directive based on that expert advice. He was correct to refuse. The damage proves that. Now the question is, if Robert did not clear the ice, who did?" "That is irrelevant," Gregory jumped in. "The point is that Robert violated HOA directives." "It is absolutely relevant," James shot back. "Because someone acting with HOA authority caused $10,000 to $15,000 in damage to community property. The members of this community have a right to know who made that decision." Linda Peterson stood up from her seat in the back. "I want to know too. My dues paid for that dock. Who authorized work that damaged it?" Several other residents voiced agreement. The room was getting heated. Patricia banged her gavel. "This is out of order. We are not on trial here." "Actually," James said calmly, "you might be. My client is prepared to file suit against the HOA for wrongful fines, harassment, and negligent damage to community property. Unless, of course, the board is willing to resolve this reasonably." "What do you want?" Patricia asked through clenched teeth. "First, all fines against Robert Irving are dropped immediately, and the lien on his property is removed. Second, the HOA covers all of his legal expenses to date, which total $4,200. Third, a written apology from the board acknowledging that his refusal to clear ice was reasonable and justified. And fourth, a full accounting of who authorized the ice clearing that caused the dock damage." Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. She glanced at Gregory, who whispered something to her. "Finally," she said, "the board needs to consult with our attorney. We will take a 15-minute recess." The three board members left the room. The residents immediately started talking among themselves. I heard a mix of opinions. Some people seemed to support me. Others thought I was making a big deal out of nothing, and a few seemed mad at Patricia for creating the mess in the first place. When the board returned, Patricia looked defeated. She sat down heavily and read from a prepared statement. "The board has reviewed the inspector's report and Mr. Thornton's demands. In the interest of avoiding costly litigation, the board agrees to drop all fines against Robert Irving and remove the lien from his property. We will also reimburse his reasonable legal expenses upon submission of invoices." "And the apology?" James prompted. Patricia took a deep breath. The board acknowledges that Robert Irving's decision not to clear ice around the dock pylons was based on reasonable reliance on expert advice. We regret any misunderstanding. That is not an apology, someone called from the back. Patricia's hands clenched on the table. Fine. The board apologizes for the misunderstanding and for any inconvenience caused to Mr. Irving. And who cleared the ice? James asked. That is still under investigation, Patricia said quickly. We are looking into our maintenance records. Patricia, Susan spoke up suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. We need to tell them. Patricia shot her a look that could kill. Susan, we discussed this. No, you and Gregory discussed it. I did not agree to cover this up. Susan turned to face the room. I am sorry, everyone. Patricia hired a maintenance worker through a personal contact to clear the ice in February. She did not get board approval and she did not consult with any actual dock specialists. When I found out about it 2 weeks ago, I told her we needed to disclose it, but she refused. The room erupted. Everyone was talking at once. Patricia stood up, shouting, "That is a lie." Susan, you are out of order. I have the receipts, Susan continued, pulling papers from her folder. Patricia paid a handyman named Derek Walsh, Gregory's nephew, $800 of HOA funds to clear ice around the dock. No competitive bidding, no expert consultation, no board vote. I am the treasurer, and I was asked to code the expense as general maintenance so it would not raise questions. James was already on his feet. Madam President, if this is true, you have committed fraud and self-dealing. Hiring your fellow board member's nephew without proper authorization and then attempting to cover it up is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. Patricia grabbed her clipboard and her purse. This meeting is over. I do not have to listen to these accusations. Patricia, you cannot just leave, Linda called out. We need to vote on this. I am the president and I am adjourning this meeting. No, Susan said firmly. According to our bylaws, any board member can call for a vote of no confidence with support from 3 residents. I am calling for a vote to remove Patricia Donovan as president and from the board entirely. Hands shot up around the room. Way more than 3. James was frantically taking notes. Patricia looked around the room, seemed to realize she had lost, and stormed out. Gregory scrambled to follow her, leaving Susan alone at the table. The next hour was chaotic but productive. The residents voted overwhelmingly to remove Patricia and Gregory from the board. Susan was appointed interim president, and 2 other residents, Linda Peterson and a man named Frank Russo, who I vaguely knew from neighborhood events, were appointed to fill the vacant board seats. The new board immediately passed a resolution dropping all claims against me, apologizing formally, and agreeing to reimburse my legal fees. They also voted to hire a forensic accountant to review all HOA finances for the past 2 years to determine if there were other irregularities. Finally, after some debate, they voted to report Patricia's actions to the Minnesota Attorney General's office, which had oversight of homeowner associations. By the time the meeting ended, it was after 6 in the evening. I was exhausted but relieved. James clapped me on the shoulder. You did good, Robert. Standing your ground was not easy, but it was right. What happens to Patricia now depends on what the investigation finds. If she misused HOA funds, she could face civil liability at a minimum. If it is bad enough, there could be criminal charges for fraud or embezzlement. I never wanted it to go that far. I know. But sometimes when you shine a light on bad behavior, you find more problems than you expected. This was not just about you and the ice. This was about a board president who thought she was above accountability. Over the next few weeks, spring fully arrived in Minnesota. The ice on the pond broke up and melted, revealing the damaged dock in all its sad glory. The new board hired a reputable dock company to make repairs, which ended up costing $13,000. They also hired a forensic accountant, who discovered that Patricia had been using HOA funds inappropriately for years. Nothing huge, mostly small amounts here and there. Things like expensing personal meals as board meetings or paying her landscaper with HOA funds for work at her own house. In total, the accountant estimated Patricia had misappropriated about $8,000 over 2 years. Susan and the new board reported their findings to the Minnesota Attorney General's office and also filed a civil suit against Patricia for reimbursement. I tried to stay out of the details at that point. I had gotten what I wanted, which was to be left alone and not to be treated like Patricia's personal maintenance crew. In May, about 2 months after the emergency meeting, I was sitting on my back deck, enjoying a warm afternoon when Susan stopped by. We had become friendly since she had stood up at the meeting, and I appreciated her integrity. "Thought you would want to know," she said, accepting a beer from me. "Patricia settled the civil case. She is paying back the $8,000, plus she is covering the full cost of the dock repairs." The Attorney General's office decided not to pursue criminal charges, but they did issue a formal reprimand and banned her from serving on any HOA board in Minnesota for 5 years. How did she take it? I heard she is planning to sell her house and move out of state. Too embarrassing to stay here after everything came out. I felt a complicated mix of emotions about that. I had not wanted to ruin Patricia's life. I had just wanted her to stop trying to control mine. And Gregory, he resigned from the board immediately after the forensic audit started. I think he was worried about his own exposure, given the whole nephew situation. He is still living here, but he keeps a very low profile now. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunlight sparkle on the open water of the pond. The repaired dock looked solid and sturdy, ready for another summer of fishing and swimming. "You know what the funny thing is?" Susan finally said. "If Patricia had just left you alone, none of this would have come out. The dock would have been fine like it always was. But she was so determined to control everything and everyone that she created the exact problem she claimed to be preventing." "Control is a funny thing," I said. "People who need it most are usually the ones who should have it least." Susan clinked her beer bottle against mine. "I will drink to that." The rest of that spring and summer passed peacefully. The new HOA board was reasonable and professional. They hired contractors for actual maintenance work and stopped trying to conscript residents into unpaid labor. They also revised the community covenants to add clearer limits on board authority and better financial oversight procedures. I started taking my morning walks across the pond again, once winter returned the following year. But this time, nobody questioned why I was doing it or tried to turn my voluntary activity into a mandatory assignment. The dock sat peacefully through another freeze-thaw cycle, its pylons strong and its platform level, requiring no intervention whatsoever from humans who thought they knew better than nature. One cold December morning, about 9 months after everything had settled down, I was out clearing my walking path when I noticed a for sale sign in front of Patricia's house. She had listed it back in June, but it had taken months to find a buyer. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, and I could see people carrying boxes and furniture out. I felt a strange impulse and walked over. Patricia was standing by the truck, supervising the movers. She looked older than I remembered, the stress of the past year evident in new lines around her eyes and mouth. When she saw me approaching, her whole body tensed. "Patricia," I said, "I just wanted to say I am sorry for how things turned out." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, her expression softened slightly. "Robert, I appreciate that, but you do not owe me an apology. I did this to myself. I was so focused on being in charge, on making sure everything was done my way, that I stopped listening to reason. That dock did not need me to save it." "You were right about that. Where are you headed, Arizona? I have a sister in Phoenix. Warm weather, no HOA drama." She almost smiled. "Well, I am sure they have HOA drama there too, but at least I will not be causing it. I hope things go well for you. Thank you, and Robert. For what it is worth, you taught me something. Sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing at all. Let nature handle what nature handles best." She gestured toward the pond. "That ice formed just fine without me interfering." We shook hands and I walked back to my house. I never saw Patricia again after that day, though I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had settled in Arizona and was staying far away from any homeowner associations. The incident became something of a legend in Lakeview Heights. New residents would hear the story and express disbelief that an HOA president would actually try to force someone to clear ice from a pond, then damage the dock herself trying to do it. Older residents would just shake their heads and say it was a lesson learned about the importance of having reasonable people in positions of authority. For me, it was a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is nothing at all. That winter, and every winter since, the pond has frozen solid, the ice has expanded and contracted according to its ancient patterns, and the dock has stood firm through it all. No human intervention required, no management needed, no board resolutions necessary. Just nature doing what nature has done for millions of years, completely indifferent to the plans and regulations of homeowner associations and the Karens who run them. The ice forms when it is cold, melts when it is warm, and somehow, miraculously, the dock survives every single year without anyone actively managing anything. As I sit here now, almost 2 full years after the whole mess started, looking out at the frozen pond in the middle of another Minnesota winter, I feel grateful for how things worked out. I still live in Lakeview Heights, still own my lakefront property, and still enjoy my morning walks across the ice. The community is more peaceful now, the HOA is well managed and reasonable, and the dock remains a popular gathering spot every summer. But whenever I walk past those dock pylons, now standing straight and strong after their repairs, I remember the lesson they taught me. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is resist the pressure to act, to trust in natural processes, and to stand firm against people who confuse control with leadership. The ice will always crack and groan and shift. That is what ice does. And if you let it do its work without interference, without trying to manage or manipulate or force it into submission, it will eventually melt away when spring arrives, leaving everything intact and ready for the next cycle. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way, through public embarrassment, financial penalties, and having to move away from a community she had tried so hard to dominate. I learned it too, though my lesson came with a much better outcome. The pond does not need a manager. The ice does not need to be controlled. The dock does not need saving from natural processes it has survived for over 2 decades. And I do not need an HOA president telling me how to spend my winter mornings. Some problems solve themselves if you just step back and let them. And some HOA presidents create far bigger problems by refusing to step back at all. That is the real story of how I stopped clearing ice from the pond, let it crack the dock pylons, and brought down a petty tyrant who thought nature needed her supervision. The last I heard, the dock company that repaired our pylons used the incident as a case study in their training materials. They show photos of the damage and explain to new installers exactly what happens when people try to actively manage ice formation around stationary structures. The title of their presentation is perfect in my opinion. When Helping Hurts, Why Winter Docks Should Be Left Alone. Every time I think about that, I smile. Somewhere in their training office, Patricia's mistake is teaching new generations of dock installers what not to do. It is a fitting legacy for someone who was so absolutely certain she knew better than everyone else, including nature itself. And every winter, when I lace up my boots and step out onto that frozen pond, I remember the sound of ice cracking beneath my feet that February morning when this all started, and I appreciate the lesson it taught me. Sometimes the cracks are not a warning of disaster. They are just the sound of nature doing what nature does best, working out its own solutions without any help from people with clipboards and control issues.